Welcome to It Begins in Quincy. We're taking national issues that play out on the local level, and we're bringing them to light.
We are using Quincy, Massachusetts as the case study so that you can spot these things happening in your own hometown.
Because you have to remember, it begins in Quincy, but it doesn't end there.
Exactly.
We're talking about a very heated, multi-year conflict between local political activists and the sitting city government. It challenges almost every fundamental assumption you might have about how, grassroots democracy actually operates in the digital era.
Imagine a classic David versus Goliath story.
Okay.
You have concerned, everyday citizens rising up to fight exorbitant, massive political pay raises. And they're using the ballot petition, the purest tool they have.
A great narrative.
It is. But what if the David in this scenario wasn't actually a scrappy underdog at all?
Right.
What if David was actually a highly sophisticated data mining political machine operating completely under the guise of grassroots outrage?
That's the real question.
Yeah, and to understand how that works, I actually want to start at the end of the timeline.
I think that's the perfect place to start.
Let's look at the present-day situation, because there is a massive disconnect between what the public thinks is happening right now and what the legal documents actually say.
Right. Let's look at late May 2026.
Okay, so it's late May 2026.
Right.
And if you were to log on to local community message boards right now, or, scroll through the Quincy Reddit threads.
Or just listen to the newly elected political class in the city.
Right. You would see an absolute explosion of celebration.
Pure victory laps.
Yeah. Supporters of a ballot committee called Quincy Citizens for Fair Raises are claiming total victory. They are loudly claiming that a May 22, 2026 memorandum and order issued by Superior Court Judge Rosemary Connolly is a total definitive vindication of their entire movement.
They are definitely spinning a very aggressive, very specific public narrative.
Which is what?
The claim being circulated online right now is that the court basically just caught a corrupt city hall red-handed.
Okay.
The narrative is that the city establishment deliberately threw out the valid legal signatures of everyday citizens.
Wow.
And they're claiming that Judge Connolly has now swooped in, saved the ballot initiative, and proved the activists were right all along.
Right, but I've got the 19-page court order right here, and the illusion, it starts to fade the second you actually read the text.
It really does.
So let's break down the legal jargon here, because, what did these activists actually ask the judge to do?
Well, this is where we really have to separate the PR spin from the procedural truth. The activists went to court and formally asked Judge Connolly for something called a writ of mandamus.
Okay, hold on. A writ of mandamus. Let's translate that for everyone. What does that actually mean in plain English?
In plain English, a writ of mandamus is a very powerful court order. It compels a government official to properly fulfill their official duties or to correct an abuse of discretion.
Okay.
In this specific context, the activists wanted the judge to literally force their petition onto the ballot.
They wanted a mandate.
Exactly. They also asked for emergency injunctive relief, and they were raising these incredibly sweeping constitutional claims under Articles 9 and 16 of the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights.
So they basically went in and said, Your Honor, make them put this on the ballot right now.
That was the request.
So did she do it?
She explicitly denied it.
Wow. Wait, really?
Yes. If you look at the conclusion of the court order, it clearly states, in all caps, the plaintiff's request for mandamus is denied.
So she completely refused to force the petition onto the ballot.
Completely. But more importantly, she deliberately declined to rule on the massive underlying legal question of whether this salary cap petition is even legally valid to begin with.
Wait, slow down. What do you mean legally valid to begin with? Are you saying it might be illegal to even ask the question on the ballot?
Yes, exactly. And that's what the public is missing. The city of Quincy's defense, which was led by city solicitor James Timmons, they didn't just argue about whether the signatures were messy.
Right.
Timmons argued that the entire petition is, quote, dead on arrival as a matter of state law.
Dead on arrival.
Yes, he pointed directly to Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 39, Section 6A.
Okay, let me look that up real quick. Chapter 39, Section 6A. Okay, what does that actually say?
That state statute dictates that municipal salaries can only be set or altered by a city ordinance.
An ordinance.
Right. And an ordinance means a formal vote by the legislative body, which is the city council. The statute explicitly does not allow municipal salaries to be set by a citizen initiative petition.
So let me get this straight. The city is essentially saying to the activists, look, It doesn't matter if you have 10 valid signatures or 10,000 valid signatures.
Right.
Under state law, you legally cannot use a ballot question to write municipal paychecks.
Exactly.
I mean, that isn't just a roadblock, that's a brick wall.
It is a foundational brick wall.
Mm.
But here is the critical detail that the activists are kind of glossing over. Judge Connolly explicitly set that massive statutory argument aside for now.
Oh, she didn't even rule on it.
No, she split the case into phases. She ruled strictly on a Phase 1 hyper-technical administrative matter.
Okay.
She said, essentially, look, before we even discuss if this petition is legal under Chapter 39, we have to figure out if you even have enough signatures to get to the next step.
Right, the signature count.
And to understand her ruling on that, you really have to look at the physical pieces of paper the activists used to gather the signatures in the first place.
Right, because I was reading through the trial materials, and it turns out they didn't use a standard state template for their clipboards.
No, they didn't.
They kind of went rogue on the graphic design.
They did. They custom designed their own petition sheets. Now, Massachusetts law generally requires a signature and an address.
Yeah.
The standard.
Okay.
But this group added an extra legally unrequired column to their grid. They explicitly labeled it printed name, and they placed it right next to the cursive signature line.
So the grid looks like signature, printed name, address.
Exactly. Now, when the activists submitted these sheets to the city clerk's office just followed standard statewide guidelines.
Which is to look at the signature.
Right. The clerk's staff looked at the column legally designated for the signature. And as anyone who has ever seen a petition knows, signatures on a clipboard outside a grocery store are often rushed, messy, illegible, cursive scribbles.
Oh, yeah. My signature looks like a heart monitor flatlining. Nobody can read it.
Right. And the clerk's office looked at these scribbles. They couldn't decipher them. And so they marked 1,397 names with a red S for illegible. And they rejected them.
Which, honestly, let me play devil's advocate for the city here.
Sure.
That sounds like standard, boring, bureaucratic protocol. The box says signature. I look at the signature. I can't read the signature. I move on to the next line.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm a bureaucrat. I don't have time to be a handwriting forensic analyst.
The city argued exactly that. They argued they just followed the strict letter of the law and their standard operating procedure. But the activists pushed back.
Of course.
They argued that the clerk should have just looked 1 inch to the left at that custom printed name column they added to decode the messy cursive.
And this is where Judge Connolly steps in with her ruling.
Yes. Judge Connolly leaned on the broader principles of the Massachusetts Constitution, specifically the fundamental right to petition the government. She essentially ruled that administrative offices must use a modicum of common sense. She stated that because the extra printed name column was sitting right there, and because those printed names were perfectly legible, the clerk's office had a duty to use that contextual information to verify the voters.
Okay, so let me summarize her grand, sweeping ruling that has everyone celebrating on Reddit right now.
Go for it.
She essentially just handed the city clerk a massive stack of paperwork and said, go back to your desk, open up the database, and read the middle column.
That is exactly what she did. It is literally just a mandate for more administrative paperwork. She ordered the clerk to review those specific 1,397 disputed signatures by June 18, 2026, using the printed names as a guide.
So celebrating this ruling is basically like celebrating a massive victory because the referee agreed to check the instant replay monitor on a single foul,
Right.
while completely ignoring that the other team is arguing the sport you're playing isn't even legal in the first place.
It is a brilliant analogy because that is the ultimate trap for the activists here. Judge Connolly made it explicitly clear in her order that if the plaintiffs cross the necessary 8% signature threshold after this recount, the petition merely advances to the next step.
And what happens at the next step?
At that exact moment, the city is entirely free to bring its primary legal argument back to the table. The city can point right back to Chapter 39, Section 6A, and move to kill the petition completely on the grounds that it violates state law.
Wow. So the narrative being spun online right now is just a complete smokescreen.
Total miscorrection.
The judge didn't say the activists were legally right about capping the mayor's pay. She didn't endorse their political movement. The activists took a procedural homework assignment and weaponized it into a PR shield.
Exactly.
They are claiming total victory just to mask the machinery operating in the background.
Which is exactly why we need to examine that machinery. To understand why these signatures are so heavily disputed in 2026, and to really understand the true nature of this movement, we cannot just look at the court case.
We have to rewind.
We have to go back to the summer of 2024. to the origin of the outrage and look at how this data was harvested in the first place. The events of 2024 and the court case of 2026 are distinct, inseparable links in a single operational pipeline.
Okay, let's travel back to June 2024 then. Let's lay out the inciting incident. The Quincy City Council meets, and they approve massive, staggering pay increases.
Unprecedented increases.
The mayor's salary jumps 79%, going from roughly $159,000 to $285,000.
And the city council votes to give themselves a 50% raise, bumping their own pay from $29,800 to $44,500.
I mean, those are staggering percentages. Regardless of when the last pay adjustment occurred, seeing numbers like 79% and 50% provides the absolute perfect fuel for rapid public mobilization.
Oh, absolutely. It's the perfect catalyst. And right on cue, enter a group calling itself Adjust Quincy.
Adjust Quincy. Now, they were launched by two individuals, Joe Murphy and Maggie McKee, and they positioned themselves perfectly, didn't they?
They did.
They presented themselves as this ragtag group of concerned neighbors, acting on raw, organic, moral outrage. They hit the streets, clipboards in hand, gathering signatures for a referendum to repeal those exorbitant raises.
Right. And according to the city charter, they faced a very steep climb. They needed to gather signatures from approximately 12% of the registered voters in the city,
Which is how many?
which equated to roughly 8,000 signatures. And they had a very tight 20-day window after the council vote to do it.
That's tough.
Thousands of citizens stopped them on the street or welcomed them to their doors and signed these legal petitions. And they signed them under the explicit assumption that they were participating in direct democracy to force a public vote on these races.
But the group fell short, right?
They did. They collected somewhere around 5,000 to 6,000 signatures. They missed the 8,000 threshold.
Now, normally, in a transparent democratic process, if a grassroots campaign falls short, you just submit what you have to the clerk, you put out a press release saying, we tried, we fell short, but look at the support we gathered, and the process concludes.
That's standard operating procedure.
But I'm looking at the timeline here, and that is not what happened.
It is not. And this is where we encounter one of the most chilling, revealing pieces of evidence in the entire stack of source material.
Yeah, let's get into this.
It comes directly from a transcript of an interview on that local television show, AM Quincy. The broadcast date is September 18th, 2024. The host of the show, Joe Catalano, is interviewing Maggie McKee and Joe Murphy.
I actually have the transcript right in front of me. Let's read this because it's just wild.
It really is.
Catalano pushes them on the status of the signatures. There were rumors floating around from city councilors that the group didn't actually have the 5,000 signatures they were claiming to the press. So Catalano basically says, where are the signatures? Why didn't you turn them in to prove you have them?
And how does Maggie McKee respond to that?
She explicitly admits on live television that they kept thousands of physical signature sheets locked away in a basket in her home.
In a basket.
Yes. They deliberately chose never to submit them to the city clerk. And Catalano asks why, and McKee's stated reason is that the signers were, quote, scared.
Scared?
Yeah. She claimed that she promised her volunteers she would keep the names confidential because the voters feared retaliation from the city government.
Let's stop and analyze the profound legal and logical absurdity of that defense.
Please do.
An initiative petition or a referendum is, by its very legal definition under the Constitution, a public affidavit.
Right.
It is a citizen stepping into the public square, raising their hand, and officially registering their demand for a change in government policy.
Right. I'm trying to wrap my head around this. How can you sign a legal public document meant to trigger a citywide election with the expectation of remaining anonymous?
You can't.
That defeats the entire philosophical and legal purpose of a public petition. It's like, I don't know, it's like standing up at an open mic in a crowded town hall meeting, screaming your name and your demands into the microphone, and then demanding the town clerk redact your voice from the public record because you're feeling shy.
Exactly. It doesn't work that way. It fundamentally contradicts the mechanism of direct democracy.
It makes no sense.
And when you realize that anonymity on a public petition is a contradiction in terms, you are forced to reevaluate the actual motive of the organizers.
Like, why really hide the clipboards?
Right. If you look at the mechanics, by leveraging the shock value of a 79% and 50% raise, the organizers successfully activated a massive base of voters. By then hiding behind the claim of protecting voters from fear, they effectively isolated this activated base from the official city processes. The 2024 referendum drive wasn't a failed attempt at direct democracy. It was a highly successful, completely unregistered data mining operation.
Oh, wow.
They built a massive database of verified names, addresses, and contact information of voters who were explicitly, demonstrably angry at the sitting government. And they did it all without ever filing a single regulatory disclosure with the state.
Okay, I see your point. That's a lot of valuable data to just sit on.
And we don't even have to speculate about their motives, because Maggie McKee essentially admitted it out loud months earlier.
Wait, really? Wait.
If you go back to an earlier AM Quincy appearance on June 26, 2024, right when the signature drive was first starting Kimmit, McKee was asked what happens if they don't get enough signatures.
And what did she say?
She explicitly stated that gathering signatures was, quote, still good for sharing information and building community.
Ah, sharing information and building community. I know enough about political campaigns to know exactly what that translates to.
What's that?
In the vocabulary of a political strategist, that translates directly to identifying sympathetic voters and building a targeted contact list.
Precisely. They harvested the data of thousands of locals under the guise of an imminent legal action, and then locked that data in a basket for their own private use.
Okay, so this naturally leads to the next massive question. You have a small group of ambitious organizers sitting on a locked basket of 5,000 angry voters' names, addresses, and phone numbers.
Right.
What on earth do you do with that data without triggering state campaign finance laws? I mean, you can't just operate a rogue political campaign out of a living room forever.
No, you cannot. You need infrastructure, you need funding, you need a vehicle. And to understand how they built that machinery, we have to navigate what the regulatory complaints refer to as an alphabet soup of overlapping organizations.
Okay, an alphabet soup.
Yeah, this brings us to the period from late 2024 into early 2025. It is the ultimate shell game. We are not looking at separate, spontaneous grassroots movements popping up organically across the city. We're looking at the exact same small group of people swapping organizational hats to avoid campaign finance scrutiny and to bypass tax-exempt restrictions.
Let's lay out the players for the listener. You have Maggie McKee, Joe Murphy, and another key organizer who pops up named Susan Yuan.
Right.
They start as Adjust Quincy, the group with the basket, but that's just one hat.
Right. Because while Maggie McKee was presenting herself on television as a concerned neighbor holding a clipboard for Adjust Quincy, she was simultaneously the co-founder of an entirely different entity called Quincy Votes, with an exclamation point.
Quincy Votes. Now, I'm looking at the IRS complaints here. What makes Quincy Votes so special?
Well, Quincy Votes was officially registered as a tax-exempt 501c3 organization.
Okay, let's stop and explain that, because that is a massive deal. Under the Internal Revenue Code, a 501c3 is a charity.
Yes.
It is strictly prohibited from participating in or intervening in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for a public office. You get tax-exempt status because you promised the government you are a strictly nonpartisan entity dedicated to neutral civic education. You can say, go vote. You cannot say, go vote against the mayor.
Exactly. So Quincy Votes is presented to the public as the neutral, smiling face of civic duty. It's the organization hosting friendly forums and reminding people about Election Day.
Right.
But according to the formal complaints sent to the IRS and OCPF, the reality inside the building, what was happening with the data, was very different.
The complaints detail an incredible data operation. They identify a member and strategist operating within Quincy Votes, who was internally referred to by the moniker Shiv.
Shiv, yes.
And Shiv wasn't just sitting around reminding people to vote. Shiv was systematically analyzing localized voter turnout data. They were taking the names from the basket and cross-mapping them against city maps.
They were calculating micro-targeted electoral victory thresholds. And to understand why this is so devastating, you really have to understand the math of local municipal elections. They are a completely different beast than a presidential election.
Oh, absolutely. Presidential elections are about millions of votes and massive demographics. Local elections are about abysmal turnout.
Exactly. We are talking about participation rates consistently under 30%. In a small ward election with sub 30% turnout, you do not need tens of thousands of votes to win. You don't even need thousands.
You need hundreds.
Right. Sometimes in a tight, quiet ward race, a swing of 50 votes can completely determine who sits on the city council.
And Shiv was doing the math. Shiv was figuring out exactly how many of those 5,000 angry people from the basket lived in which specific ward, and calculating exactly how many votes it would take to systematically dismantle the city council. And the craziest part is, they didn't keep this a secret. The mask slipped in public.
It slipped significantly during a public rally on September 9, 2024. Activist Susan Yuen took the microphone. Now remember the timeline here.
Right.
This is right around the time they are locking the 5,000 petition signatures in the basket, and Maggie McKee is on TV talking about scared voters. Yuen is standing in front of a crowd, and she reveals that they took data from a letter-writing campaign, a campaign undoubtedly fueled by the network they had just built, and they mapped it.
I have the quote right here.
Yeah.
She literally said the quiet part out loud into a microphone. She bragged to the crowd that they had cross-mapped exactly 400 of their engaged signers directly to the at-large city councilors.
And it gets more specific.
It does. She bragged that they had mapped clusters of 35 to 55 critical voters directly to individual ward councilors.
Consider the immense strategic implications of that.
Yeah.
If your data analyst knows that a ward councilor only won their last election by a margin of 40 votes, and you have just successfully identified, agitated, and mapped 55 angry voters living in that exact ward.
Wow, you hold the mathematical power to unseat that incumbent. You aren't just protesting anymore. You have built a targeted electoral missile.
If we think of this as a Trojan horse, Quincy votes was the hollow wooden exterior of nonpartisan civic engagement. It looked perfectly harmless.
Right.
But hiding inside the belly of the horse, analyzing the data from the basket, were highly targeted political operatives calculating exactly how to flip a ward.
And by early 2025, they decided it was time to open the trapdoor of the Trojan horse. On February C, 2025, Quincy Votes held another rally. Liz Speakman, who was explicitly identified as the president of this supposedly nonpartisan 501c3, stood in front of the crowd and gave them a direct order.
What did she say?
She told the attendees that they needed to run for office themselves to clear out the current city council.
Wait, I have to stop you again. The president of a tax-exempt charity, an organization legally barred by the IRS from political campaign intervention, is standing at a microphone actively recruiting a slate of candidates to overthrow the municipal government.
Yes.
How is that not immediately shut down? Because the enforcement mechanisms for the IRS and the state campaign finance boards are notoriously slow. Regulatory bodies operate months, often years, behind the actual events.
So they just took advantage of the lag.
The activists knew they had a window to operate in the gray area before any complaints could be fully investigated. Speakman's speech signaled the transition into the next phase of the operation. With the exact electoral thresholds calculated by Shiv and the thousands of angry voters securely mapped in their private database, it was time to deploy the payload.
Which brings us to the summer of 2025, the strategic pivot. This is where I think we find the ultimate smoking gun of this entire deep dive.
I agree.
They have the data, you know the math, and now they need the candidates to put on the ballot.
So in early 2025, the original group, Adjust Quincy, deployed a want-to-run infrastructure on their website. They began actively recruiting candidates. And what they were offering wasn't just moral support.
Yep.
They were promising these candidates direct access to the volunteer networks, the data assets, and the digital mailing list that had been built on the backs of those initial anonymous signature signers from 2024.
They are essentially offering a turnkey, fully operational political campaign to anyone willing to join their slate. Like, you don't have to build a list, we already have the basket.
Exactly.
And who steps up to lead the charge? Let's look at June 11th, 2025. This is a crucial bridge date in the timeline.
On June 11th, Maggie McKee, the woman who held the basket of unsubmitted signatures, the co-founder of the supposedly nonpartisan Quincy Votes, steps directly out of the nonprofit shadows.
Oh boy.
She appears on AM Quincy and officially declares her candidacy for the Ward 5 City Council seat.
Now, I'm sure she filed the paperwork to distance herself from the nonprofit. On paper, she quietly resigns from her leadership role at Quincy Votes to avoid a screaming conflict of interest, right?
On paper, yes, she steps down. But the regulatory complaints note that her husband remained deeply embedded within the organization's back-end operations. The institutional tie, the access to the data, was functionally unbroken.
And once the candidates are locked in McKee and several others, the group executes a hard, formal pivot. On August 12, 2025, they officially step into the light of the regulatory system.
They finally register.
Yeah, they form a registered ballot question committee called Quincy Citizens for Fair Raises.
This is a monumental shift. Up until this point, for over a year, they had been collecting data, raising small-dollar donations, and organizing rallies without filing a single campaign finance report. They operated in the dark.
Right.
Now, finally, they registered with the city and the state, and they submit a brand new initiative petition.
This new petition is designed for the November 2025 ballot. Its stated goal is to cap the mayor's salary at $183,000 and mandate that any future alterations to elected officials' salaries must be done by a vote of the citizens.
And here is where we must apply a magnifying glass to the source material. This is the smoking gun you mentioned. We need to conduct a side-by-side textual analysis of the narrative they sold to the public in 2024 versus the actual legal document they filed in August 2025.
Let's do it. I love textual analysis. In 2024, when they were knocking on doors and filling that basket, what were they furious about?
The 2024 movement was built on absolute fiery moral outrage over both the mayor's 79% raise and the city council's 50% raise.
Okay.
The council's pay bump from roughly $30,000 to $44,500 was a central, equal pillar of their grievance. They yelled about it at every rally.
Okay, now let's look at the formal petition text submitted in August 2025. The exact text that Judge Connolly was reviewing in the court case we talked about earlier.
Yes.
What does it say about rolling back the city council raises?
The city council pay rollbacks are completely and entirely deleted.
Let me make sure I'm reading this right. They deleted them.
The petition seeks to delete the current salary of the mayor and set it at $183,000. It seeks to alter how future salaries are handled. But there is absolutely no language in the 2025 petition rolling back the councilor's pay to the pre-2024 levels. Capping or cutting council compensation was completely omitted from the language.
Why would a movement birthed from the outrage of greedy politicians giving themselves raises suddenly decide that a 50% raise for the city council is actually totally fine to leave alone?
It exposes the underlying intent of the entire operation. Ask yourself, by August 2025, who are the leading activists driving this new petition?
Maggie McKee, Virginia Ryan, and Susan Ewan.
And what were Maggie McKee, Virginia Ryan, and Susan Ewan actively doing in August 2025?
Oh my God, they were actively running for those exact city council seats.
Precisely. To leave the council rollbacks in the petition text would mean that if they won their elections in November, they would be legally cutting their own future paychecks.
Wow.
The pure, unadulterated moral crusade against exorbitant government salaries vanished the exact second it collided with their own personal political ambition.
It is the ultimate red flag. Let's trace the full arc here. They used the outrage over the council raises to harvest the data.
Yep.
They hid the data in a basket so the city couldn't see it. They used a 501c3 to map the data to target the vulnerable incumbents. And then, once they were in position to take those jobs for themselves, they quietly deleted the council pay cuts from the agenda so they could pocket the cash themselves.
They utilized manufactured public anger to hijack local government.
Which brings us to the culmination of this strategy. We are moving into late 2025. They built the machine, they protected their future salaries, and they dropped the payload on Election Day.
Let's contextualize the size of this payload. In September 2025, this newly registered ballot committee formally submits their new petition to the city clerk.
Right.
This time, they don't hide it in a basket. They need it to make a splash. They submit 7,163 signatures.
We need to recall the data analysis performed by Shiv earlier. In an environment where less than 30% of registered voters bother to show up, the electorate is small, sleepy, and predictable. Traditional incumbents rely on established, quiet voting patterns.
Right. So what happens when you suddenly inject a locked-in, highly agitated, heavily targeted block of over 7,000 angry voters into that quiet, sleepy ecosystem?
It acts as a mathematical wrecking ball.
Exactly. Those 7,163 signatures were not just random names. They represented a weaponized anti-establishment voter bloc. By coordinating this bloc with their hand-picked slate of candidates, they guaranteed that the longtime incumbents would be completely blindsided.
The incumbents didn't even know this army existed until it was too late.
And the strategy worked flawlessly. In the 2025 municipal election, 6 of the 7 city council seats changed hands. The activists became the government.
The Trojan horse opened in the middle of the night, and they took the city. But the story doesn't end on election night because the hypocrisy bill eventually comes due.
It always does.
Let's look at early 2026. Once these new councilors, Maggie McKee, Virginia Ryan, Susan Ewan, and the others were sworn into office, they get their first paycheck. What does that paycheck say?
It says $44,500. They began receiving the very salaries that they had spent the entire previous year protesting.
Couldn't they just vote to lower their own salaries once they were in power? Didn't they have a supermajority? They could just fix it from the inside.
No, because state conflict of interest laws, combined with the city charter, explicitly bar elected municipal officials from changing their own pay during their current term.
Oh, really?
You cannot vote to give yourself a raise, and conversely, you cannot vote to cut your current pay. Any salary changes they voted on would only affect the next term of the council after the next election.
Okay, so they are legally locked into receiving the higher salary. I'll give them that. But surely, if they were morally opposed to the money, they could just refuse to accept the extra $14,700, right? Like, write a check back to the city, refuse to cash it.
Yes, individual councilors have the absolute right to voluntarily defer or return a portion of their salary to the city's general fund. There's a very simple administrative process for that.
Okay.
But initially, the new councilors did not do this. When political opponents pointed out that they were quietly pocketing the raises they campaigned against, the new councilors' camp initially pushed back. They claimed that individual deferrals were, quote, too complicated to execute administratively.
Too complicated. That is a fascinating, incredible phrase to hear from people who just executed a multi-year, data-driven, cross-map electoral takeover using shell nonprofits.
Well, he's right.
Writing a one-page deferral letter to Human Resources is too complicated. That requires a massive, breathtaking amount of gaslighting to sell to the public. You ride a wave of populist anger into office, pocket the cash, and play dumb about the paperwork.
And this is where we see their public relations strategy truly diverge, and where the timing of their actions becomes massively suspicious.
Let's look at a specific article from the Patriot Ledger. It's written by a reporter named Peter Blandino, and it was published on May 15th, 2026.
This article reveals what actually happened behind the scenes regarding the $14,700 raises. It turns out that some of the newly elected councilors, including Maggie McKee and Virginia Ryan, did eventually figure out how to navigate the complicated paperwork.
Oh, they did?
They wrote quiet deferral letters to the city, officially declining the extra pay.
But wait, if they declined the pay, why didn't they shout it from the rooftops? Why didn't they hold a massive press conference? Like, look at us, we kept our promise. They didn't announce it to the voters who put them there. They kept it totally quiet. Why?
Because they waited for the optimal strategic moment to release the information. They didn't tell the public directly. Instead, they utilized a friendly media connection to leak the story to the Patriot Ledger on May 15th.
May 15th, 2026. Let's look at our timeline here. When did Judge Connolly issue her massive 19-page court ruling regarding the signatures that had the whole town talking?
May 22, 2026.
Exactly 1 week later. The timing is unbelievable. They leaked the deferral story perfectly.
Exactly.
They knew the court order was imminent. By leaking the deferral letters to a friendly reporter a week early,
It demonstrates that they were managing the public narrative with the exact same precision they used to manage the voter data. They are incredibly sophisticated operators.
clearly.
But, to be fair to the source material, not all the activists were on the same page regarding this PR strategy. The Patriot Ledger article and the council meeting transcripts highlight a fascinating divergence with Councilor Susan Yuan.
Oh, yes. This is the moment that truly gives the entire game away. While McKee and Ryan wrote quiet deferral letters to protect their image, Councilor Susan Yuan took a drastically different path.
During a February 2, 2026 City Council meeting, the issue of the raises came up for debate. Councilor Yuan, the exact same woman who bragged at the rally about mapping 400 voters to overthrow the council, actually laughed out loud while speaking into the microphone.
She laughed.
She laughed, and she claimed that she and her colleagues were, quote, forced to take this pay raise.
Forced? She laughed and said she was forced.
Yes, she explicitly refused to return the $14,700 to the city's general fund. She wouldn't write the letter. Her justification was that she didn't trust the current mayor, Thomas Koch, with the money. She explicitly blamed the Koch administration's overspending and stated she was keeping the extra taxpayer money on her own personal payroll so that she could personally donate it to local schools instead.
I'm staggered by the hubris of that statement. Let me get this straight. She ran a ruthless, data-driven campaign decrying the arrogant financial overreach of the city government. She told the voters that politicians shouldn't be enriching themselves. And her very first act in office is to essentially look at the taxpayers and say, actually, I know better how to spend your tax money than the city does, so I'm keeping the cash to dispense as I personally see fit.
It perfectly encapsulates the entire illusion we've been tracking. The moral high ground, the outrage over the paychecks, was a temporary tactical position. It was utilized only as long as it was necessary to acquire power. Once the power was acquired, The justifications shifted entirely to protect that newly acquired position.
And this brings us to the most important part of this entire discussion, because if you are listening to this and thinking, wow, Quincy sounds like a crazy town, glad I don't live there, you are missing the forest for the trees.
Oh, absolutely.
This isn't just about Quincy. The Quincy illusion is merely a symptom of a much larger, massive, systemic vulnerability in how we make laws across the country.
Exactly. Because what happened in Quincy is happening on a massive scale statewide.
Right.
The current system is fraught with peril, that it has become far too easy for well-funded special interest groups to cherry-pick issues, bypass the legislative process entirely, and put poorly written, highly self-serving proposals directly before the voters.
Up to a dozen questions could hit the state ballot in a single year. We're going to look like California with 24, 25 questions on every ballot. And the amount of money fueling this is staggering. I want you to guess how much money was spent on ballot campaigns in Massachusetts in the 2022 cycle alone.
So it was over $65 million.
$65 million just to put questions on a ballot. That figure alone demands that we fundamentally reevaluate the romanticized notion of the initiative process.
It requires a historical correction. When we are taught civics in high school, we are taught about the progressive era. The initiative process was designed around the turn of the 20th century as a safety valve.
Right.
The idea was that if the state legislature became entirely corrupted by wealthy insiders, railroad barons, or powerful political machines, the pure, honest citizens had a recourse. They could grab a clipboard, stand on a street corner, gather signatures, and override the corrupt politicians. It was designed as the ultimate tool of the underdog.
It was supposed to be the emergency brake on corruption. The reality today is vastly different. Ballot initiatives are almost exclusively sponsored by special interest groups, and the laws they propose are meticulously tailored to help that specific interest group, often completely ignoring the broader systemic consequences. Legislative lawmaking, for all its flaws and slowness, is designed to go through multiple iterations, committee hearings, public testimony, and compromises.
Right.
A ballot question is a stark, unalterable up or down vote drafted entirely by the advocates who benefit from it.
It has evolved from a safety valve for the underdog into a highly lucrative, multi-million-dollar industry.
Yeah.
It is an industry populated by political consultants, data miners, and paid signature-gathering firms who charge by the signature. And as we just saw in our deep dive into Quincy, you don't even need $65 million to exploit the system.
You really don't.
You just need a 501c tax shelter, a savvy data analyst named Shiv, and a willingness to use public outrage as a Trojan horse.
Just scaled down to the micro level. A small group of operatives cherry-picked a highly emotive issue, political pay raises. Everyone hates politicians getting raises.
Of course.
They use the mechanics of the initiative petition process not to pass a law, but to build a proprietary database. They use that database to oust incumbents and advance their own personal political ambitions. And they did it all while operating under an impenetrable smokescreen of grassroots democratic purity.
If the tools of direct democracy, the sacred constitutional right to petition your government, can be so easily weaponized by operatives running a shell game, it forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question.
Which is?
How do we protect the actual voice of the voter from being manipulated by the very system designed to empower them?
The state Senate recently approved a bill that would require ballot question campaigns to file financial disclosures at least every month. They are desperately trying to pull back the curtain on who is actually funding these operations. Repealing the initiative process entirely is a political non-starter that would guarantee a massive backlash. The public loves the idea of direct democracy, even if they are completely unaware of how it is being manipulated.
The structural vulnerability remains. And until the laws catch up to the technology of modern data operations, these tactics will continue to be deployed.
Which leaves the burden of vigilance entirely on us, the voter. I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to ponder on your own.
A concept that builds on everything we've discussed today but stretches into the future of our political ecosystem.
Throughout this hour, we've looked at how overlapping organizations swapped hats to avoid campaign finance scrutiny. Think about it. If highly specialized, data-driven political groups are essentially acting as unregulated, shadow political action committees using nonprofit tax exemptions to pay for their infrastructure, and using unsubmitted anonymous petitions to harvest voter data and dodge financial disclosure laws.
Yeah.
Do we need to completely redefine what a political campaign actually is in the digital age?
The legal definitions written decades ago are clearly failing to capture the reality of how these operations function function today.
Yeah.
So the next time you are walking out of a grocery store and someone in a brightly colored t-shirt steps into your path, hands you a clipboard, and asks for your signature to fight a terrible injustice,
Look closely.
look past the shiny object. Ask yourself, are you actually signing a law, or are you just feeding an algorithm? Keep questioning the narrative, look for the hidden wire, and we'll see you next time.